Know your place, girl. You don't belong here. The venomous words echoed as a young black woman, radiant with quiet strength, stood drenched on the steps of a glittering Chicago mansion. As a community outreach coordinator, she had poured her heart into fitting into her husband's elite world, only to face sneers, whispered slurs, and icy disdain from his wealthy family. That night at a lavish gala, their cruelty peaked. Public humiliation, racial taunts, and betrayal by the man she loved left her stranded in a storm, her dreams shattered. Yet in the rain, a sleek limousine emerged, promising a truth that would upend everything. What secret could turn her pain into power? Subscribe now to catch our latest stories and share in the comments where you're watching from. Will her tormentors regret their words? Stay tuned to uncover the shocking twist that awaits. The Grand Henderson estate loomed on the outskirts of Chicago, its marble columns glowing under the soft light of 1,000 twinkling bulbs. Inside, the air buzzed with the clink of champagne flutes, the hum of a jazz quartet, and the self-assured chatter of the city's elite. The night was meant to celebrate Margaret Henderson's 60th birthday, a milestone for a woman who wielded her family's old money like a scepter. But for the young black woman stepping out of a sleek Audi, her heart pounding with fragile hope, this evening was a battlefield. She was a community outreach coordinator, her beauty as striking as her resilience, with dark skin that shimmered under the chandelier light and eyes that held a quiet fire. Her name carried the weight of her African heritage, meaning peace, a cruel irony given the storm she was about to face. She had spent months preparing for this night, saving every spare dollar from her modest salary to buy an elegant black dress that hugged her curves with understated grace. Her hair, intricately braided at a salon she could barely afford, cascaded in a crown of artistry. Her new heels, though pinching her feet, gave her the extra inch of confidence she desperately needed. She needed, to prove she belonged in this world of wealth and privilege, a world her husband, Ethan Henderson, had promised to share with her. As they walked toward the mansion's towering doors, Ethan's hand rested lightly on hers, his smile warm but fleeting. "You look incredible," he whispered, his voice a fleeting anchor in the sea of her nerves. But she felt the familiar weight of his hesitation, the way his courage seemed to waver the closer they got to his family. The Henderson mansion was a spectacle, a monument to excess. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbows across the ballroom, where servers glided with trays of champagne and canapes too delicate to eat. Ice sculptures glistened, catching the light like frozen flames. The guests, all white, all dripping in designer labels, moved with the ease of those born into privilege. She felt their eyes on her the moment she crossed the threshold, their gazes sharp as knives. A woman in a sequined gown leaned toward her companion, whispering just loud enough to be heard. "She's from Chicago, but really from somewhere else." The words stung, a coded jab at her blackness, as if her birthplace wasn't enough to claim her Americanness. She forced a smile, clutching Ethan's arm tighter, but he was already scanning the room, his attention drifting. Margaret Henderson swept toward them, her silver hair impeccable, her smile as sharp as cut glass. She enveloped Ethan in a theatrical embrace, her voice dripping with maternal pride. "My darling boy, you've made it." Then her eyes slid to the young woman, and the warmth vanished. "And you," she said, her tone clipped. "How nice you could join us." The words were polite, but the subtext was clear. "You don't belong." She felt the room tilt, the weight of Margaret's disdain pressing against her chest. "I hope you find the evening comfortable," Margaret added, her lips curling into a smirk. "This crowd can be a bit refined for someone with your background." The word background landed like a slap, a reminder of her foster care upbringing, her lack of pedigree. A nearby guest chuckled softly, muttering, "Bold choice, that hair," as if her braids were an exotic curiosity rather than a cultural crown. Ethan squeezed her hand, a weak attempt at reassurance, but she could feel him pulling away, his spine softening in his mother's presence. She had learned this about him over their 2 years of marriage. Alone, he was her champion, his hazel eyes full of promises, but under the Henderson spotlight, he became a shadow of himself, deferring to his mother's iron will. She swallowed the hurt, determined to endure. Tonight, she told herself, she would win them over. She would show them she was more than the orphan girl they sneered at, more than the phase Margaret whispered about to her friends. The ballroom was a whirl of opulence, the jazz quartet weaving melodies that should have been soothing, but only heightened her tension. She tried to mingle, approaching clusters of guests with a practiced smile. "What a lovely evening," she offered to a woman in a pearl necklace, who responded with a frosty, "Indeed." The conversation turned to college. Her community college degree drew raised eyebrows, and family, where her admission of growing up in foster care prompted a guest to suddenly need a refill. Each interaction was a test she failed. Their politeness was a thin veneer over judgment. One man, swirling his whiskey, asked, "How do you find these events? Must be quite a change from wherever you're from." The implication was clear. Her blackness, her lack of wealth, made her an outsider. She laughed it off, her throat tight, but inside her resolve wavered. She drifted to the edge of the room, hoping to blend into the shadows near the dessert table, its tiers of macarons and petit fours, a mocking display of excess. She sipped her champagne, trying to steady her nerves, when a woman, Margaret's friend, her face flushed with wine, stumbled into her. The collision was deliberate, the woman's elbow sharp. The champagne glass in her hand tipped, and red wine from the woman's glass splashed across Margaret's pristine white gown. The room fell silent, the music seeming to pause as every eye turned to the scene. The stain bloomed like blood on snow, and Margaret's face twisted with fury. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," the young woman stammered, grabbing napkins, her hands trembling. "Let me help." But Margaret recoiled, her voice a hiss. "Don't you dare touch me." The words were loud enough for the room to hear, and the crowd leaned in, sensing drama. "I should have known better than to let someone like you near decent people," Margaret spat, her eyes raking over the young woman's skin, her dress, her very existence. "This is exactly what I expected." The accusation hung heavy, laced with the unspoken. Her blackness, her poverty, made her a walking disaster. The young woman's cheeks burned, humiliation searing through her. She looked to Ethan, her eyes pleading for him to step in, to be the husband who vowed to protect her. But he stood frozen, staring at the marble floor, his silence louder than Margaret's venom. The crowd murmured, some hiding smirks, others filming discreetly on their phones. Margaret wasn't done. She strode to a small platform where the quartet had paused, her heels clicking like a gavel. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice carrying over the silent room, "it's time we address the obvious. Some people," she turned, her gaze locking onto the young woman, "simply don't belong in civilized society. They bring chaos, embarrassment, nothing but trouble." The word trouble cut deep, a dog whistle for every stereotype the young woman had fought her whole life. She felt the weight of 100 eyes, judging, agreeing, relishing her downfall. "Mother, please," Ethan finally mumbled, his voice weak, almost inaudible. "Can we handle this privately?" Margaret's eyes flashed. "No, Ethan. I've tolerated this for 2 years, hoping you'd see reason. This girl is not one of us. She never will be." She turned back to the young woman, her voice ice cold. "I want you out of my house, now." The young woman's breath caught, the room spinning. She whispered Ethan's name, a final plea, but he looked away, his shoulders slumped. "Maybe it's best if you go," he muttered, barely meeting her eyes. The betrayal was a knife to her heart. Margaret snapped her fingers, and 2 burly security guards appeared, flanking the young woman like she was a criminal. "Escort her out," Margaret ordered, "and ensure she takes nothing that isn't hers." The implication was clear. She was a thief, an interloper, unworthy even of the air in this room. The guards guided her toward the massive wooden doors, her heels echoing in the silence. The crowd parted, their faces a mix of pity and amusement. Just before the doors closed, Margaret's voice rang out one last time. "Some people need to learn their place." The doors slammed shut, the sound like thunder, leaving her alone in the night, the storm waiting to swallow her whole. Rain lashed down in sheets, soaking the young black woman's elegant dress, her braids heavy with water, her heels slipping on the slick driveway. She stood frozen, Margaret's final words, "Some people need to learn their place," ringing in her ears like a curse. The betrayal of her husband, Ethan, cut deeper than the cold. His silence in the face of his mother's venom was a wound that bled invisibly. But the night was far from over, and the ballroom's glittering facade was about to crack under the weight of its own cruelty. Inside, the jazz quartet resumed its melody, a falsely cheerful counterpoint to the tension still simmering in the air. The guests, momentarily stunned by the young woman's ejection, quickly returned to their champagne and small talk, their whispers now laced with gossip. "Did you see her face?" one woman murmured, her diamond earrings glinting as she leaned toward a friend. "She didn't belong here anyway." Another guest, a man in a tailored tuxedo, smirked over his whiskey. "People like her always cause trouble," he said, his voice low but deliberate, the word "her" heavy with racial undertones. The crowd's amusement was palpable, a collective satisfaction in seeing an outsider put in her place. Some pulled out their phones, the soft glow of screens betraying those live streaming the drama to social circles beyond the mansion's walls. Margaret Henderson stood near the center of the ballroom, her white gown still marred by the wine stain, now a badge of her righteous fury. She smoothed her silver hair, her composure restored as she accepted a fresh glass of champagne from a server. "Let's not let this ruin the evening," she announced to a cluster of guests, her smile as sharp as ever. "Some people simply don't understand how to behave in civilized company." The guests nodded, their agreement a chorus of privilege, blind to the cruelty they endorsed. One woman, her pearls gleaming, added, "It's a shame Ethan got tangled up with someone so unrefined." The word was a dog whistle, a thinly veiled jab at the young woman's blackness and foster care roots, and the room hummed with quiet approval. Ethan lingered near the dessert table, his hands shoved into his pockets, his face pale. The young woman's desperate glance as she was escorted out haunted him, but the weight of his mother's expectations pinned him in place. He wanted to chase after her, to apologize, to be the man she thought he was when they met in that bookstore 3 years ago. But the ballroom was his mother's domain, and here he was not her husband but Margaret's son. A guest clapped him on the shoulder, chuckling. "Tough night, huh? You'll find someone more suitable." The implication stung. Suitable meant someone white, someone wealthy, someone who fit the Henderson mold. Ethan forced a weak smile, his heart twisting but said nothing. Meanwhile, the young woman's humiliation was being dissected by the crowd. A group of Margaret's friends gathered near an ice sculpture, their voices dripping with faux sympathy. "She tried so hard with that dress," one said, her tone mocking. "But you can't buy class, can you?" Another laughed, her eyes glinting with malice. "And that hair, beautiful, sure, but so ethnic. It's like she was trying to make a statement." The comment landed like a blade, reducing the young woman's cultural pride to a spectacle for their amusement. A younger guest scrolling through her phone giggled as she read comments on her livestream. "Who let her in? She's out of her league." The virtual audience echoed the room's disdain, amplifying the young woman's shame across digital platforms. Margaret, sensing the room's attention drifting, decided to cement her victory. She stepped onto the small platform where the quartet had paused, her presence commanding silence. The guests turned, eager for more of the drama they pretended to deplore. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying the authority of a queen addressing her court, "I think it's time we address the elephant in the room." She paused, letting the anticipation build, her eyes scanning the crowd with calculated intensity. "Some people," she continued, her tone heavy with disdain, "bring nothing but chaos and embarrassment wherever they go. They don't belong in civilized society, and I will not allow my family's reputation to be tarnished by such disruptions." The word disruptions was a deliberate choice, a coded reference to the young woman's race and class, and the crowd understood it perfectly. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room, some guests nodding, others raising their glasses in silent toast to Margaret's resolve. A man in a navy suit whispered to his wife, "She's right. People like that don't fit here." The phrase "people like that" was a dagger, slicing through the young woman's identity, reducing her to a stereotype. The live streams captured it all, the comments flooding in. Kick her out for good. And she should have known better. The virtual mob fed off the room's energy, each ping of a notification a fresh wound. Ethan finally spoke, his voice barely audible over the hum of the crowd. "Mother, please," he said, stepping forward, his hands trembling. "Can we just handle this privately?" His plea was feeble, a flicker of defiance quickly extinguished by Margaret's glare. "No, Ethan," she snapped, her voice cutting through the air like a whip. "I've been handling this privately for 2 years, hoping you'd come to your senses. But clearly, you need a wake-up call." She turned to the crowd, her expression one of righteous indignation. "This girl is not one of us. She never will be. And I refuse to pretend otherwise for one more second." The guests erupted in soft applause, their approval a chilling affirmation of Margaret's words. Ethan's shoulders slumped, his eyes fixed on the floor. He wanted to defend his wife, to tell them they were wrong, but the weight of his mother's authority and the room's complicity silenced him. A guest nearby muttered, "He'll thank her later. She's saving him from a mistake." The word mistake was another jab, implying the young woman's very existence was an error to be corrected. Ethan's silence was deafening, a betrayal that would haunt him long after the night ended. Margaret turned her gaze to the spot where the young woman had stood, as if she could still see her trembling form. "I want her out of my house now," she declared, her voice cold as steel. "And don't even think about her coming back." The crowd parted as two security guards, their faces impassive, moved toward the young woman's last known position, only to confirm she was already gone. Margaret's lips curled into a satisfied smile, but she wasn't done. "Security," she called, her voice rising for effect. "Escort that person off the property and make sure she takes nothing that doesn't belong to her." The implication was clear. The young woman was a thief, a danger, unworthy of even the courtesy of a name. The guards nodded, their heavy footsteps echoing as they moved toward the doors, though their task was redundant. The young woman was already outside, cast into the storm. The crowd watched, some with pity, others with glee, as the spectacle concluded. A woman in a velvet dress leaned toward her friend, whispering, "She'll learn her lesson now." The live streams continued, the comments growing harsher. "Good riddance," and "She got what she deserved." The virtual world mirrored the ballroom's cruelty, each word a brick in the wall of the young woman's humiliation. Margaret stepped down from the platform, her victory complete. She accepted another glass of champagne, her stained gown now a symbol of her triumph. The quartet struck up a new tune, and the guests resumed their dancing, the night's drama already fading into gossip. But for the young woman, now alone in the rain, the wounds of this night would not fade so easily. Her heels clicked on the wet pavement, each step a reminder of the rejection she'd endured, each drop of rain a mirror to her tears. The Henderson mansion glowed behind her, a beacon of a world that had deemed her unworthy, its light unable to pierce the storm that enveloped her. The Henderson mansion glowed like a distant star, its warmth mocking the young black woman as she trudged through the storm, her heels sinking into the wet gravel of the long driveway. Each raindrop stung like a needle, soaking her black dress until it clung to her skin, her braids heavy and unraveling, her heart heavier still. Margaret's venomous words and Ethan's silence had stripped her bare, leaving her as exposed as the child she'd once been, shuffled between foster homes with no one to claim her. But as she stumbled forward, alone in the Chicago night, a flicker of light cut through the rain, a beacon not from the mansion, but from something or someone approaching. Headlights pierced the downpour, their glow slicing through the darkness like a lifeline. She squinted, her breath catching, half expecting Ethan's Audi, a belated act of remorse. But the vehicle slowing beside her was no ordinary car. It was a sleek black limousine, its polished surface gleaming even in the storm, the kind reserved for the powerful, the untouchable. Her heart pounded, a mix of fear and curiosity, as the rear window rolled down with a soft hum. A man's face appeared, his features so strikingly familiar that she gasped, her hand flying to her chest. His dark skin mirrored hers, his high cheekbones and deep brown eyes a reflection of her own. aged by time but unmistakable. It was like staring into a future version of herself. "Young lady," he said, his voice warm yet urgent, cutting through the roar of the rain. "I've been looking for you." Her name, her maiden name, the one tied to her foster care days, rolled off his tongue with a reverence that made her freeze. No one used that name anymore, not since she'd taken Ethan's. She stepped back, her heels slipping, her mind racing. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice trembling, not from the cold but from the weight of the moment. The man didn't hesitate. He stepped out of the limousine, rain soaking his tailored suit, his presence commanding despite the storm. His eyes, brimming with tears, held a depth of emotion she'd never seen. "I'm David Okoro," he said, his voice breaking, "and I'm your father." The words hit her like lightning, electrifying and disorienting. She shook her head, disbelief warring with a flicker of hope she'd long buried. "That's impossible," she whispered, her hands clenching into fists. "I was abandoned. My parents didn't want me." David's face softened, but his tone was firm, unwavering. "No, that's not what happened. Not even close." He reached into his jacket, pulling out a phone, its screen glowing faintly as he shielded it from the rain. He swiped to a photo, holding it out to her. The image showed a young black woman, her smile radiant, holding a baby with eyes that matched her own. The resemblance was undeniable, a mirror to her own features, frozen in time. "This is your mother, Amara," David said. "She loved you more than anything." Her breath hitched, the rain blurring her vision. Or perhaps it was tears. She clutched the silver necklace at her throat, the only keepsake she'd carried through every foster home, its delicate pendant etched with a pattern she'd never understood. David's eyes flicked to it, and his expression softened further. "That necklace," he said, "was hers. I gave it to Amara the day you were born." He stepped closer, ignoring the rain that soaked his expensive suit, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "You were 6 months old when she died in a fire. I was in the Marines, deployed overseas. By the time I came back, the system had taken you. They said I had no rights because we weren't married. I've been fighting to find you for 25 years. She stared at the photo, her world tilting. The woman, Amara, had her cheekbones, her smile, her fire. The baby in her arms with those same deep eyes was undeniably hers. "Why now?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Why did you find me tonight?" David's jaw tightened, a flash of anger mixing with his sorrow. "I've been searching since the day you disappeared. I built Okoro Industries from nothing, used every resource and hired the best investigators. 3 months ago, they found you here in Chicago. I was planning to approach you, to do this right, but tonight—" He paused, his eyes darkening. "Someone at that party saw what happened. They called me, said a young black woman was thrown out into the storm. The description, your necklace, your grace, matched you perfectly." Her mind reeled, the weight of his words clashing with the pain of the night. Someone at the gala, a stranger amid the cruelty, had seen her suffering and reached out. She wanted to believe him, but years in foster care had taught her to guard her heart. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" she asked, her voice sharp, though her hands trembled. David nodded as if expecting her doubt. He pulled out another item, a small, weathered journal, its pages protected in a plastic sleeve. "Amara's," he said, handing it to her. She opened it, her fingers numb from the cold, and saw handwriting that felt oddly familiar. A page listed her birth date, her name, and a note. "My peace, my light, my daughter." The words blurred as tears spilled down her cheeks. David's voice softened, but it carried a strength that anchored her. "I know this is overwhelming. I know you have no reason to trust me. But please, let me get you out of this rain. Let me tell you about your mother, about the life you were meant to have." He gestured to the limousine, its open door a promise of warmth and answers. She looked back at the mansion, its lights a cruel reminder of the rejection she'd endured. The crowd inside had mocked her, dismissed her, seen her as less because of her skin, her past. But this man, standing soaked and steadfast, offered something she'd never had, a connection to who she was. "Why did they take me away?" she asked, her voice cracking. David's face darkened, a shadow of old pain. The system wasn't kind to a young black soldier with no money and no ring on his finger. They said I wasn't fit to be a father, that you'd be better off in foster care. They were wrong, but they had the power. I fought them in court, lost everything but my resolve. When I built my company, every dollar went to finding you. His words carried a bitter edge, a glimpse of the systemic barriers that had torn them apart. Barriers she'd felt her whole life in different forms. She clutched the journal, her fingers tracing Amara's words. The rain seemed to slow, or perhaps it was her perception, the world narrowing to this moment. What was she like? She asked, her voice softer now, hungry for a piece of the mother she'd never known. David smiled, a flicker of warmth breaking through his grief. Amara was a dreamer. She wanted to be an artist, to paint stories that changed hearts. She was fierce, kind, and she loved you so much she'd sing you to sleep every night. He paused, his voice thick. You have her spirit. I saw it the moment I looked at you. The storm raged on, but his words were a shelter, wrapping around her like the blanket she imagined waiting in the limousine. She looked at the necklace, then at David, his eyes mirroring her own. Trust was a risk, but so was staying in the rain, alone with her broken dreams. Okay, she said finally, her voice steady despite the cold. Tell me more. David nodded, relief washing over his face. He opened the limousine door, and she stepped inside, leaving the storm behind, unaware that this moment would redefine her future. The limousine door closed with a soft thud, sealing the young black woman in a cocoon of warmth and quiet. The storm's roar muffled to a distant hum. She clutched her mother's journal, David Okoro's words. Tell me more, still echoing in her mind, a spark igniting something fierce within her. The rain-slicked windows reflected her face, no longer trembling, but resolute, her eyes burning with a newfound strength. She glanced at David, his presence a steady anchor, and felt a shift. She wasn't the outcast anymore. Take me back, she said, her voice steady, cutting through the hum of the engine. Back to the Hendersons. David's brow furrowed, but a glint of pride flickered in his eyes. They need to know who they just crossed, she added, her words a vow, not a plea. The limousine turned, its tires hissing on the wet pavement, heading back to the mansion where her humiliation had unfolded. The Chicago night was still wild with rain, but the young woman's resolve burned brighter than the storm. David nodded to the driver, and two black SUVs joined their convoy, their headlights slicing through the downpour. Inside, sharp-suited lawyers and security personnel sat ready, their presence a silent promise of power. The Henderson mansion loomed ahead, its golden glow spilling from towering windows, the sounds of laughter and jazz drifting faintly into the night. The gala continued, oblivious to the reckoning approaching. Guests danced and mingled, their chatter now laced with retellings of the young woman's expulsion, her shame transformed into their entertainment. But she wasn't the broken figure they'd cast out. She was returning as someone new, someone they'd never dared imagine. The limousine pulled into the circular driveway, the SUVs flanking it like sentinels. David stepped out first, his tailored suit still damp, but his posture commanding, exuding an authority that made the rain seem irrelevant. The young woman followed, her ruined dress clinging to her frame. Yet she stood tall, her braids glistening, her silver necklace catching the light. The storm had not diminished her, it had forged her. Security guards at the mansion's entrance tensed, their hands hovering near earpieces. But David's presence, calm, unyielding, made them hesitate. The young woman's heart pounded, not with fear but with purpose. She wasn't here to beg for acceptance. She was here to reclaim her dignity. David rang the doorbell, its chime cutting through the party's hum. A servant answered, his eyes widening at the sight of the convoy. David, imposing and resolute, the young woman beside him, and the team of lawyers and security in tow. Get Mrs. Henderson, David said, his voice low but carrying the weight of a man who knew his power. The servant stammered, then disappeared into the ballroom. The young woman's pulse quickened as she glimpsed the crowd through the open door. Guests in glittering attire, their faces flushed with champagne and gossip, some still clutching phones that had broadcast her earlier disgrace. The jazz quartet played on, but the air felt charged, as if the room sensed the shift. Margaret Henderson appeared, her wine-stained gown a stark reminder of the night's earlier drama. Her silver hair was still impeccable, but her expression was one of annoyance. Her lips pursed as if interrupted by a triviality. "This is a private event," she snapped, her voice sharp with entitlement. Then her eyes landed on the young woman, and her face twisted into a scowl. "You!" she spat, her tone venomous. "I told you you're not welcome here." The words were meant to wound, but the young woman stood unmoved, her gaze steady, fortified by the man beside her. Margaret's eyes flicked to David, then back, confusion creeping into her sneer. "Mrs. Henderson," David said, his voice calm but resonant, like a judge delivering a verdict. "I'm David Okoro, and this is my daughter." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "The woman you just humiliated and threw out into a storm." The name Okoro hung in the air, and a ripple of recognition passed through the gathering crowd. Guests drifted toward the entrance, drawn by the commotion, their murmurs growing as they caught sight of David. A man in a pinstripe suit whispered urgently to his companion, "Okoro Industries. That's the David Okoro." The name carried weight, a tech titan whose empire dwarfed the Hendersons' wealth, and the room felt the shift. Margaret's face paled, her composure cracking like thin ice. "Your daughter," she stammered, her eyes darting between David and the young woman. "I don't understand. What kind of game is this?" Her voice wavered, but she clung to her indignation, refusing to yield. David stepped forward, his presence filling the doorway. "No game," he said, his tone hardening. "You called my daughter a disgrace, had her escorted out like a criminal, all because you judged her by her skin and her past. You didn't know she's the heir to Okoro Industries, did you?" The revelation landed like a thunderclap, and the crowd gasped, phones now raised to capture this new twist. The young woman felt the eyes of the room on her, but this time they weren't mocking. They were stunned, re-evaluating, recalculating her worth. She stepped forward, her voice clear and unwavering. "I came here tonight hoping to be seen as your equal," she said, her gaze locked on Margaret. "I wanted your respect, not your money, but you made it clear what you think of me, because of where I come from, because of how I look." Her words cut through the room, each syllable a rebuttal to the slurs and sneers she'd endured. A guest muttered, "She doesn't look like an heiress," the comment laced with disbelief at her blackness, but David's glare silenced them. Ethan pushed through the crowd, his face ashen, his eyes wide with panic. "Mr. Okoro, sir," he said, his voice trembling. "I had no idea. I mean, if I'd known who she was." His words trailed off, feeble and hollow. David turned to him, his expression one of unmasked contempt. "You had no idea," he repeated, his voice low and dangerous. "You didn't need to know who her father was to treat her with respect. She's your wife, and you let your mother call her trash. You stood by and did nothing." Ethan flinched, his shoulders slumping under the weight of his shame. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, their earlier amusement replaced by unease. Margaret tried to recover, her voice shaking. "This is a misunderstanding," she said, forcing a smile. "If I'd known she was your daughter, I never would have—" David cut her off, his tone sharp. "If you'd known she had money, that's what makes someone worthy in your eyes? Not their character, not their heart, but their bank account?" The question hung in the air, exposing the shallow cruelty of the room. A woman in the crowd whispered, "She's still not one of us." Her words a desperate cling to prejudice, but the murmur was drowned by the growing buzz of recognition. "Okoro Industries," another guest hissed. "They're worth billions." The young woman's heart raced, but her voice was steady as she spoke again. "I didn't need your approval to know my worth," she said, addressing Margaret, Ethan, and the silent crowd. "You judged me for my skin, my past, and you thought that made you superior. But you're the ones who showed your true colors tonight." Her words were a blade, slicing through the pretense of the gala. She turned to Ethan, her eyes hard. "You chose silence when I needed you most. That's not love. That's cowardice." Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came. His guilt was a visible weight. David placed a hand on her shoulder, a silent signal of support. "We're done here," he said, his voice final. But one of the lawyers stepped forward, his briefcase gleaming under the mansion's lights. "Mrs. Henderson," he said, his tone formal, "my client will be pursuing legal action for defamation and emotional distress. You'll hear from us soon." The crowd parted as David and the young woman turned to leave, their convoy waiting in the rain. Margaret's voice called after them, desperate now. "Please wait. This can be resolved." But the young woman didn't look back, her steps firm, her heart no longer seeking their validation. The young black woman's heels echoed on the wet pavement as she walked away from the Henderson mansion, David Okoro's hand on her shoulder a steady anchor. The lawyer's parting words, "You'll hear from us soon," ringing like a promise of justice. The rain still fell, but it no longer felt like a punishment. It was a cleansing, washing away the weight of a night that had tried to break her. She didn't look back at Margaret's desperate pleas or the mansion's mocking glow. Her heart, once tethered to the hope of fitting into that world, now beat with a new rhythm, one of self-worth, of roots reclaimed. As the limousine's engine hummed, carrying her toward a future she'd never imagined, she felt the stirrings of a life reborn. 6 months later, Chicago's skyline sparkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of her penthouse, a gift from David that perched high above the city's pulse. The young woman stood at the glass, her reflection sharp against the night, her braids now styled with quiet elegance, her silver necklace glinting with new meaning. She was no longer the outsider scrambling for approval. She was a force, a community outreach director at Okoro Industries, where her work gave voice to those who, like her, had been overlooked. Her days were filled with purpose, leading initiatives to support foster children, each project a bridge between her past and her newfound mission. The penthouse, with its sleek furniture and walls adorned with her mother's rediscovered artwork, was more than a home. It was a testament to her reclaimed identity. David had become her rock, their bond growing stronger with every shared moment. They spent evenings in the penthouse's cozy library, sipping coffee as he recounted stories of Amara, her passion for painting, her laughter that could light up a room, her dream of a world where their daughter would thrive. He showed her old sketchbooks, Amara's vibrant canvases filled with bold colors and stories of resilience, each one a piece of the mother she'd never known. "You have her fire," David would say, his eyes warm with pride, and she felt it, a spark that had always been there, now fanned into a flame. Their conversation stretched late into the night, piecing together the 25 years they'd lost, each memory a stitch in the fabric of their family. The Hendersons, meanwhile, had become a cautionary tale splashed across Chicago's tabloids. Headlines screamed of their fall from grace, with op-eds dissecting Margaret's public humiliation of a woman now known as David Okoro's daughter. Social media buzzed with clips from that night, the grainy live streams exposing Margaret's venomous words. "Some people don't belong in civilized society," and sparking heated debates about privilege and prejudice. One viral post read, "They called her trash because of her skin, but she's an heiress to billions." The backlash was relentless, with commentators calling out the Hendersons' elitism and the subtle racism woven into their actions. Margaret's social circle shrank, her invitations to galas quietly rescinded, her reputation tarnished by her own cruelty. Ethan, too, bore the weight of the scandal. His face, once a fixture in society pages, now appeared in blurry paparazzi shots, his eyes hollow as he dodged reporters outside his office. He tried to reach her, his attempts growing more desperate with each passing week. Bouquets of roses arrived at her penthouse, their petals wilting alongside handwritten notes begging for forgiveness. "I was wrong," one read. "I should have stood up for you." He called daily, leaving voicemails that pleaded for a second chance, his voice cracking with regret. Once he appeared at Okoro Industries' gleaming headquarters, his suit rumpled, his face gaunt. Security turned him away, but not before she caught a glimpse of him from her office window, a man diminished by his own choices. She felt no satisfaction, only a quiet resolve to leave him behind. Margaret's apologies were more calculated, a parade of extravagant gestures meant to salvage her image. A diamond bracelet arrived, its accompanying note dripping with false sincerity. "A terrible misunderstanding, dear. Let's put this behind us." Charity gala invitations followed, each one a transparent attempt to align with her newfound status. The young woman sent them back unopened, her silence louder than any response. She had spent 2 years chasing Margaret's approval, believing it would validate her worth. Now, standing in her penthouse, surrounded by Amara's paintings and David's unwavering support, she knew she'd never needed it. The Hendersons had revealed their true selves, small, shallow, bound by prejudice, and she was done with their world. Her work at Okoro Industries gave her purpose beyond the personal. She spearheaded a foundation for foster youth, channeling David's resources into scholarships, mentorship programs, and safe havens for kids who reminded her of her younger self. At a recent gala for the foundation, she stood before a crowd of donors, her voice steady as she shared her story, not the scandal, but the journey of a girl who found her roots. No one should be defined by where they start, she said, her words drawing nods and applause. The event raised millions, but more than that, it gave her a platform to challenge the systems that had once torn her from her family. A reporter asked if her work was a response to the Hendersons' treatment, and she smiled, her answer sharp. It's a response to every door that's ever been slammed in someone's face because of who they are. The city had taken notice. Profiles in magazines called her a rising star, a black woman reshaping Chicago's philanthropic landscape. But the spotlight didn't define her. It illuminated the truth she'd always carried. Her mother's necklace, now a daily reminder of Amara's love, grounded her. David, too, was a constant presence, joining her at foundation events, his pride evident in every glance. They visited Amara's old studio, a small space David had preserved, its walls lined with unfinished canvases. She'd be so proud of you, he said, his voice thick, and she believed him. For the first time, she felt whole, not because of wealth or status, but because she knew where she came from. The Hendersons' attempts to reconnect grew frantic. Margaret appeared on a local talk show, her voice quavering as she claimed the night at the gala was taken out of context. The host pressed her, citing the viral clips, and Margaret faltered, her excuses unraveling. Ethan sent one last letter, its words raw. I failed you, and I'll regret it forever. She read it once, then set it aside. Her heart no longer ached for him. It was too full of her new life. She walked to her penthouse balcony, the city sprawling below, and felt a peace her name had always promised. The Hendersons had tried to break her, but they'd only revealed her strength. She wasn't the girl they'd thrown out anymore. She was a woman who'd found her family, her purpose, her voice. David joined her on the balcony, handing her a glass of wine. You're building something real, he said, his eyes reflecting the city lights. Something Amara would have loved. She smiled, the weight of her past lifting. The world that once rejected her now listened, and she did not need those who valued wealth over humanity. Her story wasn't over. It was just beginning, a testament to resilience, identity, and the power of knowing who you are. What a journey this story has been, a tale of resilience, identity, and triumph over prejudice that we hope moved you as much as it did us. How would you have faced the challenges she overcame? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear what this story stirred in you and where you're joining us from. Your voice adds to the conversation, so don't hold back. If this story inspired you, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell to catch our next tale of courage and truth. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for connecting with this powerful journey. We're grateful for every moment you spend with us, and we can't wait to bring you another story that sparks emotion and reflection. Until next time, keep shining, keep fighting, and never let anyone dim your light. See you soon.